Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Republic of Sarah. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. It's a snowstorm, which ends up leading to like a massive drama-filled catastrophe, like three different locations of like people being stuck together and just kind of like the drama that ensues. So first and foremost, let's start off with Sarah's side of things. Obviously, Weston's home early from like his story that he was working on in South Carolina, and it's like, oh cool. Well, not I say home early, like obviously in town early. He wanted to stop by and see Sarah, and they're kind of hitting it off, talking about some of the people that she's into, some of the people that have inspired her, and they kind of get to doing their thing, but immediately kind of hitting it off. Even in the bathtub situation, with being super cute. Like she's trying to do like the Abraham Lincoln. He's like, oh, how about more like David Thoreau? It's like, yeah, like neck beard. Oh yeah, that's my thing. The tattoos he has, like they were like hitting it off, and then he immediately goes like, if I really like you, but I mean, I won't do stuff with other people, but like, I mean, if you want to, but she's like, no, like, I don't want anyone else in my tub, that being the metaphor. But it's like, oh, so we're entering exclusivity right here. It's like, okay. But things get complicated when Paul shows up. Cool. It's like, right. Which immediately I was like, I don't know if that's immediately where Sarah's mind went to, but the moment he showed up, I was like, right, Paul does have that whole like, oh, you are like wanted by the U.S. government, and she's with a journalist. So immediately that's that. And even Sarah does kind of bring it up, or like, right, you're worried, you're more so worried about him than rather you are me, which he's like, yes, but at least I'm not, and that's why I wouldn't be sleeping with a journalist considering my circumstances. And it is interesting because it's that thing of like, who the hell are you to be giving me fatherly advice when you've been missing from my life for 18 years? But then they start getting talking, especially with Weston, and it start finding some inconsistencies in the stories, because he's like, oh, like, what was the story like in South Carolina? He's dodging it. I was like, okay, if it was such a big story, like, yeah, why would your, like, the paper you work for be super okay with you, like, moving away from that? If you were going to, like, do a story on, like, the governor of like, South Carolina and stuff like that, why would they be okay with you doing that? Because it's a pretty important job. So, because he started getting inside of her head and, like, right, you're sleeping with the dude who wrote a very scathing, article about you, and even suggesting like maybe he's back in your life trying to like dig up dirt on you. Maybe it's connected to Paul, maybe not. Like that's still like an avenue he could end up digging up. I think that'll be something that will come up later on, because it's going to be, Weston has no idea about Paul's circumstances, because to be fair, no one does. Like no one's connected Paul 100% to him being the one who leaked. Like, well, general public wasn't like aware that he's the one. So like, no one's put two and two together that he's the one that leaked the documents. The government is aware, but other than that, so it could still be a thing. Weston could eventually find out and be like, oh, why aren't the government looking for your dad? I don't know. It seems like he's on the up and up, because like obviously like Sarah ended up chewing into him, because it's like, she's like, I was stupid. I let you get close to me, and what was that? You going to write another report? It's like, no. I was actually in South Carolina because I lied. I was actually in South Carolina to get you a gift. And it's like, wait, what? You're like, the moment it comes out, you're like, oh boy. Oh, this is awkward. Oh, this is so bad. This is so bad. Because at first he was like, yeah, I was doing it for you. I was like, what? Does the story connect to Sarah in some shape or form? I was like, does it tie back to her mom or something? It's like, oh no, he was actually just trying to like be sweet and get her a gift, like a desk. Like he had talked about it. They had talked about it earlier. The person that she admires the most. It's like, yeah, because Sarah was like, that person's my hero. Everything that she did and what she represented in a time before sliced bread was even invented. Yeah, she's my hero. She should be everyone's hero. And it's like, I didn't quite catch the name, but it's like, right, when you hear about all that person, what that person represents, it's like, oh, that's one of those figures of history, like, because the name didn't sound familiar to me. I'm like, that's definitely someone I never learned about in history classes. That is probably like, it's probably one of those things in people. I mean, that's the sad thing. There's so many people in history, you will never know what they've done. Like they were so well above, like before their time, and were so forward thinking and progressive that you never think about like and what they might have done in the past that kind of paved the way to where we are now. You just never know it. Like a lot of those names kind of get lost to history, kind of buried underneath, because they are important, but a lot of people you don't go through everyday life learning about. Some people you have to do your own digging for. It's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. But he was getting, like, Weston was getting her a desk for that. And obviously she gets super pissed at her dad because he was like, oh, I was trying to take care of you. He's like, you literally haven't been my father for 18 years. You left. You had plenty of opportunity to try and step in, but you didn't. And, like, the fact is you came here and what did you do? You've ruined everything. It's like, she's like, what did you expect? Did you think you not leaving would not damage me in some shape or form? Like, it's not just Dani that has trauma from this family situation. Sarah's got her own. Like, once again, it's the interesting inverse. She doesn't defend her mom, but she is a little more lenient on her mom because her mom is all she had. Dani's a little more lenient on their dad because it's like, right, like, he has major issues with his mom, but his dad, it's like, understanding, like, oh, dad probably wasn't always built to be a parent, and, like, having us just kind of, like, he's willing to, like, last episode, I was like, right, I'm willing to give dad a chance, you should be too. So once again, it's just the inverse of just, like, it's kind of divided the family even more because, not saying that she's on her dad's side, her mom's side, but it's still just, you kind of, like, each one's kind of chosen their parent, kind of stuck their foot in the ground to a certain extent, kind of drawn the line. I don't know, it's just kind of like a really fascinating thing when you kind of break it down like that. Just like how complicated the Cooper family is, how super divided and complicated and kind of messy. To be fair, like, every family is dysfunctional in their own right. There's kind of like no perfect family, but they've definitely got their issues, understandably, considering everything that's going down with that family. But, luckily, Sarah was able to kind of make things, better between her and Weston, because it is a thing that she really likes him, but because she really likes him and considering the men in her life, like everything with Dani and her dad, like both the men in her life that were important to her that she loved, left. For respective different reasons, but still, and that happened at different points in her life. It's like, she had to grow up without her dad around and losing her brother, so it's like, it definitely sheds a little bit of light on just, like, her perspective on things and just kind of why, like, she kind of went after Weston the way she did, because she just kind of in this mindset of, like, right, I just thought, like, here's another person, another man in my life that was just going to leave if I, so rather than, like, it was kind of defense mechanism. Rather than waiting for you to push me away, I went ahead and pushed you away, which, once again, I get it. Like, I have my own defense mechanisms of, like, oh yeah, like, I just, in my own warped mind, I assume every relationship I'm ever going to be in is doomed from the beginning. Like, that's something that's kind of been there since I was a teenager that I've been working on as I've gotten older, but it's still there to some extent. So it's not a one-for-one, but it's like I can understand that parallel, just kind of like your mind getting the best of you when you're like, once again, a defense mechanism. I'd rather push someone away and be brokenhearted, like kind of sad, rather than someone kind of like pushing me away or, breaking up with me and me walking with a broken heart. It's kind of that's my mentality that's why I'm saying, like, I could draw some parallel to it. So, but Sarah decides going forward she's going to draw some ground rules. Like, her and Paul is like, yeah, we're not father and daughter. Like, you don't get to be my father when you kind of abandon that role. So we're not going to avoid each other because it's impossible to avoid each other considering we're both going to be living in this town. So we'll kind of start from there. So I think it is a thing of, like, rather than kind of jumping to immediately, like, oh, I'm your father. It's like, you lost it, right? 18 years ago when you walked out of my life and never came back. So what you're going to do is we're going to build this relationship little by little on a personal level. We're going to be Sarah and Paul, and we're going to start there from the ground up and kind of build our way up to maybe, just maybe, eventually getting to the point that I might be okay with the whole father-daughter dynamic again, when you've kind of finally earned my trust back. So that's kind of where things stand. So I thought that was kind of an interesting development. That story. Another story is everything in the restaurant where we got Grover, AJ, and Bella. I was kind of sad that Tyler isn't there at the time, but she's home early because she wants to take her finals at home, because it turns out, yeah, my parents are getting a divorce. It's like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, they went to New York so they could go to a couples therapist, but that didn't work out. And you're just like, you see the look on AJ's face, and you're like, yeah, I was kind of the reason for that, wasn't I? I was like, yikes. Because at the beginning you're still, like, unclear, like, what, like, I didn't know whether it was, like, well, because, like, the last time where we stood was, like, what we know is, like, Alexis, and William thought Alexis was pregnant, and she was, but then, like, I was like, okay, we never got the real full aftermath of that conversation, so it's like, well, what happened next? Well, Grover doing his best to try and make her feel better, because something I had thought about this episode was like, okay, so obviously Alexis is her stepmom, so what happened to her mom? Her mom, which is like, man, a lot of people have, like, parent issues in this regard of like Bella's mom pulled a Paul, well, different circumstances of like she met someone and left them. So like she hasn't been in Bella's life for a long time. So Alexis has been more of a mom. She's actually been longer in her life, in Bella's life, than her own biological mom was. I mean, that's a sad thing. Like I brought that up before, that this was one of the ways that situation was going to end, with like, even if, you know, like there was never going to be like a happily ever after for AJ and Alexis, because it was always going to be like the only way that was going to work out is if like she would basically, William and her would have to break up, and it's just like that would, you know, it's a nasty fallout. Would it? God, if it was, there could have been cleaner ways for this to happen, but considering like it started off as an affair, I don't think there was necessarily a clean way for this to play out. But obviously for AJ, she feels a little like, you know, she wants Bella to know like, no, Alexis cares about her. I might have broken this family to a certain extent with what I've done. I mean, granted, it takes two to tango, so it doesn't just fall on her. Like, everyone play their own little part in all of this. But the fact is that, you know, for AJ, she wants to like make Bella feel better, because she doesn't want her to like think Alexis doesn't love her, because she's like under the impression right now like, oh, Alexis just gonna run away with her girlfriend. Like, I never mattered. Like, here's another person that I cared about, that's a mother to me, who just up and abandoned me. So, but Grover's like, no, their family issues are theirs. They're gonna have to work it out. You can't get involved. But AJ tries to make it feel better, especially when she hears like Bella's like deleting photos of her and Alexis, and it's like, okay, like, the fact of the matter is, your mom, she learned all the rules to this particular sport or whatever that Bella was playing, just so she could understand what was going on. When you got arrested for that protest, she like ran up on the curb, messed up like a muffler, but she didn't care. She just wanted to make sure that you were okay, because she needed to get you as quickly as possible. The photo and the locket she has, instead of it being of William, it's of you. And it's like, so yeah, she loves you. Wait, how do you know about the locket? That's supposed to be a secret between me and my mom. And he's like, even my dad doesn't know it's not a picture of him. I was like, oh boy. Because I was wondering whether or not AJ was actually going to tell her, but it's like, no, Bella figured it out on her own, because she slipped up, which I think that actually speaks volumes in itself of like how Alexis feels about AJ rather than how she felt about William, because she never told William that, but she made sure to tell AJ. I think that speaks volumes that you're willing to tell her. But still, once again, it's just a thing of like, I think AJ and Alexis together would be happy. It's just a sad thing of like, right, it was kind of like, it like dirtied the water, it being an affair. And so, you know, if it were different circumstances, I don't even think they could ever like repair things to be where they are. The whole relationship's kind of been sullied and everything. It just, you know, that could just turn into a thing, and it probably could still end up getting used against AJ later on at some point in time, because eventually that might come to light. Like, whether it's William being spiteful because he ends up finding out it's AJ and he wants to, like, ruin her to a certain extent. Like, maybe he tries to say, like, oh, we need to take her out of her position. I'm going to take over, like, at some douchebaggery like that. I don't know. Because he currently doesn't know, because Alexis is protecting her. Because Bella didn't know it was AJ until, like, she pieced it together on her own, hearing what AJ said, so. But, yeah. That's rough, dude. But still, AJ won't give up. It's like, right, you have every right to hate me, and maybe you're kind of mad at Alexis, but don't ever get... I meant what I said. You can be mad at me, but your mom, like, Alexis does care for you. Regardless of how you feel right now, know that no matter what, you've always been and always will be loved, you know? So, where they currently stand, I don't know, like, AJ and Bella kind of looked at each other, like, before she left with Grover after the storm had passed, but beyond that, it's like, well, we don't know what's kind of next in that regard. Will Bella say anything? Maybe she'll say something to Alexis. Maybe she'll feel inclined to tell her dad. I don't know, because like it's a rough situation, and I think she looks at AJ as kind of a friend, so I don't know if she would do that, because like, right, I might be hurting and pissed right now, but I don't want to like blow like AJ's life up. I don't want to ruin things for her, especially when she went through so much trouble to kind of make me feel better. But it's like, I wouldn't need to be feeling better if it wasn't for her and my, you know, stepmom having an affair. But maybe because she is hurting right now, that might make her more inclined to tell William. I'm wondering, like, maybe her situation with Tyler might change things because, like, well, they had to do the whole long distance relationship. I'm sure that's taken its toll and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, with that, will that kind of be some parallel in which it's not a one for one, but I'm curious, like, if that will shape her opinion on how she handles this now that she knows. But so we'll see there. And our final story in this whole thing is I love that once again it's like I forgot the exact wording Sarah said in the opening, but basically it was something about like, oh yeah, like disasters or something, and it literally, that voiceover is happening right when it cuts to Corrin and Dani, and you're like, oh, disasters is perfect word in this case. Like, oh, how very befitting. Like, oh, the show, like people who edited this and like the directors and right, like they knew what they were doing with that particular. I'm like, oh, that's super good, and that it's super bad. Obviously, Corrin's immediately regretting it, saying it was kind of nightmarish. That I just want to leave here, forget this nightmare even happened. Because Dani's like, can we talk? And she's like, no. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of sucky that like, oh, we just made love and it's kind of, you're looking at it nightmarish, which once again under like affairs and everything, like I said, there was one there, here's another one. So but unfortunately for Corrin, she can't leave because they're stuck there. So it's like, oh, let's get some lights. There was some stuff in the basement. Oh, these are hearts. How about no? And he's like, okay. And she's like, hear about these skeletons. It's like, cool, I guess we'll stay under the lights of these skeletons. Like, let's get something morbid going. But I think something morbid is better than the alternative option in this particular case. But obviously, for Corrin, she's got to worry about not just Adam, but also Josh. Is like, how do I look them in the eyes? And he's like, I understand, like, how do I look Piper in the eyes? She's like, it's not a one for one. He's like, yeah, but she's my fiance. Yeah, but fiancés come and go, right? You can just toss them aside because, Corrin was his fiance prior. So it's like, right, fiancés aren't the same thing as like, because in her eyes too, it's like, right, a husband and child are a lifetime. Well, it's a commitment you went through. You and me as a fiancés, like, that was a commitment you ran away from. Piper, like, it's not a solidified commitment. Like, granted, she's just lashing out because it's just an awkward, terrible situation to be in, and she's frustrated with herself for kind of letting this happen. And so they do end up talking a little bit, and about, when he did leave, that going to, like, obviously it's like, oh, she's like, because you took up a certain sport. He's like, yeah, it's, he has that little ball with him. He's like, yeah, it acts as a little bit of a stress reliever. But she's like, oh, I can't believe you took up that particular sport. He's like, yeah, I did, because it's a lot that happened in New York, She's like, oh, life in New York must have been great. He was like, not really, not at the beginning. He was like, I was broke. I got free from like all the baggage of my mom's stuff, but I still, it took a while before I even learned how to properly ride the train, because it was a small town boy in a big town type of situation, big city. But he's like, yeah, I eventually met Piper. She's like, well, cool. Like, for Corrin, it was almost like, oh, I'm glad that, like, basically you were able to leave behind all the terrible things and kind of have a much happier life after you, happily ever after and stuff like that. Which he's like, I'm not trying to say that my life was better after I left you and everything. He's like, I am sorry. Like, she's like, it's not your fault. It's just like, for her, it's like, hearing you talk about that just took me back to who I was back the days after you left. She's like, I had a panic attack, didn't even go to prom. Like, that's where things kind of start falling apart at that time for Corrin. And he's like, I'm sorry. He's like, I had my own demons and my own battles to deal with, but I didn't realize that you became a casualty of it. So he's like, I'm sorry. But no matter how sorry he is, there's nothing he can do about it. He can't turn back time. He's like, no matter how much he wants to change things, it's like, it is what it is. They're kind of, things played out the way they did. But he tries to make it up to her by kind of throwing a prom for her and everything. It's like, right. Because, like, what was kind of the worst time of her life, like, I'm trying to make it up by at least, like, I can't delete that memory, but I can at least give you a happier memory to kind of focus on instead. So, they're dressed up and they're dancing. And kind of thinking about, that life, that perfect dream house and stuff like that. But despite everything, that's all it is, a dream, and it can never be anything more. Because for Corrin, it's like, because Dani's like, well, what if we could do it? Like, we can make things easier for Josh. Like, maybe, like, find a way to make this transition, like, us being a thing and Josh, which we still haven't really crossed that lane on whether or not. I mean, Sarah made it pretty clear that, like, Josh isn't his. I'm still curious if that's, I mean, maybe it's not the case at all. But when it comes to this whole thing, Corinne brings up the fact is that if it ever came out about their affair, like, it would destroy so many lives. We've kind of seen the aftermath of what happens when that kind of comes up, like lives being destroyed because of an affair and everything. So it's so interesting that we get a situation of like, we shouldn't tell, because we also see the aftermath of what happens when you do tell. Granted, that hasn't blown up into the way I think it eventually will, which I also get the feeling like the Dani and Corrin thing will eventually come out. Under what circumstances, I don't know, but there's just too many people that would get hurt, which even Dani's like, yeah, like, things are a lot more complicated now as adults than it was back when we were like high school. Like, we didn't have as much that would kind of get destroyed, like, you know, if we ran off together and just stayed together, you know? So at first you're still kind of around that awkward thing of like, oh, it wasn't a fair, but there's also part of me that's like, I think it was a good thing because I think it allowed Corrin to heal. Like, I mean, I think last episode gave her some clarity after like understanding why Dani just up and left like he did, but I think in totality, this all gave her the necessary, like, what she needed to kind of finally let go to a certain extent. But then you also think about the end when she ends up taking one of the skeletons from Light, and it's like, because she wanted to have some reminder of it. Like, you know, it's like holding on to that little dream, and you're like, oh, that could be a slippery slope in itself, especially because Dani ended up keeping one too. So it's kind of a reminder of this time we had, like, in the City Hall and everything. It's like that time will all, you know, it'll be this pocket little moment. Yeah, it was kind of an affair, so it makes it a little like a little shady, but at the same time there is a sweetness to it because it's like, right, because it allowed them to kind of deal with what they had to deal with. Like, right, you know, I love you too, but this is the way things are. Like, I don't know. I'm just worried about what the aftermath of that could be, that could get ugly in the future, like I said, if things play out that way. But we'll have to wait and see. That's kind of like where things ended for the episode. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where it all goes from there next episode, and whether any of these, the aftermaths of these storylines, like, what that necessarily looks like going forward. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.